The most feared Mafia boss in New Jersey first met Sarah Whitfield while hiding behind a display of heart-shaped cookies, bleeding on her clean floor, and trying very hard to look like he had meant to be there. Antonio Genevese had terrified senators, silenced traitors, and ended arguments with one quiet look across expensive tables. But at 6:43 on a rainy Thursday evening in Hoboken, he was crouched between a pink cupcake tower and a chalkboard that said "Love is sweet," and a plus-size baker with flour on her cheek was pointing a rolling pin at his head like she had personally invented consequences. Sarah had been having a normal bad day until then. Normal meant the espresso machine had hissed like it was possessed. The delivery boy had dropped 2 trays of lemon cupcakes. Mrs. Delaney from the apartment upstairs had spent 20 minutes explaining why raisins were a personal attack, and the orange stray cat behind the shop had refused the salmon Sarah had bought with money she absolutely should have used for printer ink. Normal also meant invoices were late, butter was expensive, and her landlord had sent another cheerful email using words like review and opportunity, which Sarah knew meant he wanted more money from people who already had none. By 6:30, the bakery smelled like vanilla, rain, sugar, and stress. Sarah was behind the counter, tying a box of cannoli with red string, when the first shout came from outside. She looked up through the front window. The street beyond Sweet Mercy Bakery had turned slick and silver under the rain. Cars crawled past with headlights smeared across the glass. A man in a dark coat ran across the sidewalk, one hand pressed to his side, his shoulder hitting the door hard enough to make the little bell above it scream. Sarah jumped, dropped the string, and grabbed the rolling pin because she was many things, but helpless was not one of them. The man stumbled inside and locked the door behind him. He was tall, broad, soaked from the rain, and dressed in the kind of black suit that looked less like clothing and more like a warning. Blood darkened the side of his white shirt beneath his jacket. His dark hair was wet, his jaw was tight, and his eyes moved over the bakery with quick, cold attention. Not scared, calculating. That scared Sarah more than panic would have. "Nope," she said. The man turned his head toward her. Sarah raised the rolling pin higher. "I don't know what movie you walked out of, but you are not dying dramatically between my red velvet and my vegan brownies." He blinked once, slowly, as if people did not say nope to him often, or ever. "Stay away from the window," he said. Sarah laughed, but it came out sharp because her heart had climbed halfway up her throat. "Sir, you are bleeding in my bakery. You do not get to give indoor weather instructions." A car sped past outside. Tires hissed through puddles. The man moved before Sarah could ask another question. He crossed the room and pulled the front shade down halfway, fast and silent for someone who looked like he had recently lost an argument with a knife. Then he leaned one hand against the wall near the cookie case and closed his eyes for one short second. That was the first time Sarah saw the exhaustion under the danger. It was small, almost hidden, a crack in polished stone. Then his face hardened again. "I need 3 minutes," he said. "You need a hospital." "No hospital." "Of course, because that would be reasonable, and your whole outfit is screaming unreasonable." His mouth moved, not quite a smile. "You always talk this much during emergencies?" "Only when strange men bleed near my pastries." Another shout echoed from outside, farther away this time. The man's eyes cut toward the door. Sarah heard footsteps running past the window. 2 men maybe, then fading down the block. Her grip tightened on the rolling pin. She had grown up in Hoboken long enough to know when a situation was none of her business. She had also grown up stubborn enough to ignore that lesson when someone was bleeding in front of her. The man looked back at her. "They won't come in." "Oh, good." "The scary bleeding man says the other scary men won't come in. I feel completely relaxed now." He pressed harder against his side. His fingers came away red. Sarah cursed under her breath, dropped the rolling pin onto the counter, and grabbed the first aid kit from beneath the register. "Sit. I'm fine." "You are bleeding through a shirt that probably costs more than my oven. Sit." I said I'm fine. And I said sit. One of us has bandages and one of us is leaking. For a second, silence held between them. Sarah expected him to argue. Men like him always argued, even when gravity was clearly winning. Instead, the corner of his mouth shifted again, and he lowered himself into the little chair by the window, the one decorated with painted cherries. It creaked under his weight. Sarah came around the counter with the first aid kit and stopped in front of him. Up close, he was worse, not worse looking. Unfortunately, he was handsome in a way that felt rude. Strong nose, dark eyes, thick lashes wasted on someone who clearly scared people for a living. But the cut at his side was real. The blood was real. The way his breathing tightened when he moved was real too. "Jacket off," she said. His eyes lifted. Sarah pointed at his side. "For the wound. Do not make that face. You are not that special." This time he almost smiled. He shrugged out of the jacket with controlled pain and handed it to her. The fabric was heavy, expensive, and wet with rain. Sarah set it on the chair beside him, then gently pulled the torn shirt aside. The wound was ugly but not deep enough to explain how dramatic he was being. "Knife?" she asked. "Glass." Conveniently vague. It was a crowded evening. "It is 6:45. Very crowded." Sarah cleaned the cut. He did not flinch, but his fingers gripped the edge of the chair until his knuckles paled. She noticed that. She noticed everything when people thought she did not. It was one of the gifts life had given her, after handing her several things she had not requested. People underestimated fat women in public. They talked over them, looked past them, assumed softness meant stupidity, assumed kindness meant permission. Sarah had learned to let them talk. People told the truth fastest when they thought you were only background. The man watched her hands while she worked. "You do this often?" he asked. "Patch up mysterious men in designer suits?" "No, that is a new and irritating service." "You're calm." "I own a bakery." "Yesterday, a mother cried because I didn't have gluten-free dinosaur cupcakes with emotional realism." "You are not my first crisis." A real laugh escaped him then, quiet, surprised, almost unwilling. It changed his face so quickly that Sarah's hand paused for half a second. Without the coldness, he looked younger. Not young exactly, but less like a weapon and more like a tired man who had forgotten laughter was still available. Then thunder rolled low over the street, and the look vanished. Sarah taped the bandage down. "There, you'll live, which is inconvenient because now you can pay for the pastries you ruined." He looked toward the counter. A smear of blood marked the edge of a white pastry box. 2 heart-shaped cookies had fallen onto the floor. 1 pink cupcake had been crushed under his shoe. "How much?" he asked. "Emotionally or financially?" "Both. Financially, $63. Emotionally, I'll be telling this story for years." He reached inside his jacket, then stopped when Sarah grabbed the rolling pin again. "Wallet," he said, slowly. "I'm charming, not stupid." He drew out a black leather wallet and placed several $100 bills on the little table. Sarah stared at them. Then at him. "This is not a casino. For the trouble. The trouble is $63. Keep the rest." "No." His eyes narrowed slightly, as if her refusal was more confusing than the bleeding. "No." Sarah picked up 1 bill, opened the register, counted change, and placed it in front of him. "I don't take guilt tips from men who bring street crime into my buttercream." He studied her for a long moment. Rain clicked against the windows. Somewhere behind the shop, a cat yowled like the world owed him an apology. "What's your name?" the man asked. "Bakery policy says I don't give my name to men who bleed before introductions." His gaze moved to the wall behind her, where a framed certificate hung slightly crooked. "Sweet Mercy Bakery. Owner Sarah Whitfield." He looked back at her. Sarah sighed. "Fine." "Sarah, and you are?" A pause. Too short to be hesitation. Too smooth to be truth. "Anthony." Sarah folded her arms. "Anthony." "Yes." "Anthony what?" "Anthony Black." She looked at his black suit, black shoes, black watch, black mood, and lifted one eyebrow. Wow, subtle family. That quiet laugh almost returned. Almost. A phone buzzed inside his jacket. His face changed before he touched it. Sarah saw it happen. The man named Anthony disappeared, and something colder took his place. He read the message, stood, and reached for his jacket. "You shouldn't open the door yet," Sarah said. "I have to. People who say that usually don't." He slid his jacket on carefully. "Thank you for the bandage. You're welcome for not calling the police." His eyes met hers then, direct and dark. "You should not mention this to anyone." Sarah hated how gently he said it. Threats wrapped in calm were still threats. She stepped closer, rolling pin back in her hand. "Listen, Anthony Black, or whatever your tragic stage name is, I do not know who chased you. I do not know why you are bleeding. I do not know why your suit looks like it has its own legal team. But this is my shop, my floor, my cookies, my rules. So don't use that quiet, dangerous voice on me unless you want to leave here with a very specific rolling pin-shaped regret." The bell above the door gave a soft little shake in the wind. The man stared at her, and something in his expression shifted again. Not anger, wonder maybe, or the closest thing a man like him allowed himself. "Nobody talks to me like that," he said. Sarah shrugged, though her knees were not as calm as her mouth. "Maybe you need better people." For a moment, he did not move. Then he unlocked the door, stepped into the rain, and disappeared down the sidewalk, as if the weather had opened and swallowed him. Sarah stood very still for 3 full seconds after he left. Then she locked the door, turned the sign to closed, leaned against the counter, and whispered, "Absolutely not." The orange stray cat screamed from the alley. Sarah looked toward the back door. "Don't start with me, Marmalade. I just survived a mob-adjacent Ken doll with internal bleeding." The cat screamed again. "I said don't start," but she fed him anyway, because Sarah's boundaries were excellent until someone hungry looked at her. By the next morning, she had almost convinced herself the whole thing had been a weird, rain-soaked fever dream. Almost. The blood on the floor had cleaned up. The crushed cupcake had been thrown away. The hundreds had been replaced by correct change in the register. But the memory of those eyes stayed. So did the strange feeling she had gotten when he laughed, like she had accidentally opened a window in a locked house. She was frosting vanilla cupcakes when the bell rang at 9:15. Sarah looked up and nearly squeezed buttercream across her own apron. Anthony Black stood in the doorway. Only now he was not wet, not bleeding, and not hiding behind cookies. He wore another dark suit, this one even sharper than the last, with a black overcoat and a face so controlled it made the room feel smaller. 2 men stood outside, near a black car, pretending badly that they were not watching the street. Sarah stared at him. "No." He stepped inside. "Good morning." "No. I'd like to place an order." "No. You would like to create problems near my muffins." "I need 200 cannoli." Sarah lowered the piping bag. "For what?" "A meeting." "A meeting that requires 200 cannoli?" "Yes." "Are you feeding people or building a wall?" His eyes warmed by the smallest amount. "Both, maybe." She should have told him to leave. That would have been smart. But the bakery was quiet, rent was real, and 200 cannoli could pay the electric bill and maybe the printer ink. Also, she was curious, and curiosity had always been the tiny door in Sarah's common sense where trouble liked to crawl in. "Fine," she said. "Pick up tomorrow, half paid now, and if anyone bleeds, there's a cleaning fee." He took out his wallet. $63 will not cover 200 cannoli, she added. "I know. Just checking. You have the vibe of a man who pays too much or says something annoying like bill me. I would never say bill me, because you're humble, because I don't like owing people." That answer was too honest. It landed between them, with unexpected weight. Sarah looked down at the order pad. "Name?" "Antonio." Her pen stopped. He watched her notice. Antonio, she repeated slowly. Not Anthony. I prefer Antonio. And black. He said nothing. Sarah set the pen down. You lied about your name. I simplified it. That is what liars call lying when they own good shoes. This time he smiled, barely, but truly. Antonio Genevese. The bakery seemed to go quiet around the name. Even the espresso machine stopped hissing, as if it had more survival instinct than Sarah did. She knew that name. Everyone in Hoboken knew that name, even people who pretended they did not. Genevese meant whispers at corner tables. It meant men who owned restaurants nobody ate in but everyone respected. It meant cops looking tired. It meant old women crossing themselves when certain cars rolled by too slowly. Sarah picked up the rolling pin from the counter and placed it between them. Antonio looked at it. Still? More now. I won't hurt you. That is exactly what a man named Antonio Genevese would say before becoming a documentary. His face softened in a way she did not expect. You didn't know who I was yesterday. No, yesterday I thought you were regular dangerous. This is premium dangerous. You still charged me for pastries. You still ruined them. He looked at her for a long second. Good. Good? Yes. Sarah narrowed her eyes. You are very odd for a crime lord. The word hung there. Crime lord. She had said it quietly, but not quietly enough to pretend she had not. Antonio did not correct her. That scared her more than if he had. I need the cannoli for tomorrow, he said, and I need you to understand that this shop is not a place for whatever you do. It won't be. You promise. I don't make promises casually. Well, try. It's good for emotional mobility. His mouth almost moved again. Then the phone in his pocket buzzed, and that cold shadow crossed his face. Sarah watched it with unwanted interest. Antonio read the message. For just one heartbeat, his mask slipped. Not fear, weariness. The bone-deep kind that did not come from missing sleep, but from carrying too many loaded things for too long. Trouble? Sarah asked before she could stop herself. His eyes rose. Always. The answer was simple. Too simple. It made her think of the way he had leaned against her bakery wall the night before, bleeding but still giving orders. Not like a man running from danger. Like a man trying to keep danger from spilling into the wrong room. Sarah hated that her heart made a little sympathetic movement. She shut it down immediately. Half now, she said. He paid. Exactly this time. After he left, Sarah stared at the order slip for a long while. Antonio Genevese, 200 cannoli. Pick up at noon. Marmalade appeared on the back windowsill and blinked at her. I know, Sarah told him. Terrible taste in customers. By noon the next day, Sweet Mercy smelled like fried shells, sweet ricotta, chocolate chips, espresso, and disaster, pretending to be opportunity. Sarah had been awake since 4. Her assistant, Lena, had called out sick, which meant Sarah had filled every shell herself while doing payroll, answering 3 angry emails, and gently convincing Marmalade not to fight a pigeon twice his size behind the trash cans. She had just finished boxing the last cannoli when Antonio arrived. He came alone this time. That should have made him look less dangerous. It did not. Some men needed guards. Antonio Genevese looked like the guards were decoration. Sarah pushed the boxes across the counter. 200 cannoli, no crime included. He opened one box and studied them seriously. They're pastries, she said. Not evidence. They're perfect. The compliment should not have warmed her. It did anyway, which was offensive. They are very good, she said. Perfect is for people who don't pay attention. Antonio looked at her. You don't like perfect? I don't trust it. Perfect usually means someone hid the mess. Something quiet passed through his expression. Smart woman. Sarah lifted an eyebrow. Careful. Compliments from men like you sound like traps. Men like me? Tall, bossy, emotionally refrigerated. He actually laughed then. A real one. Low and surprised. Sarah felt it in her stomach and immediately decided she was busy. But he did not leave after paying. He stood near the counter, looking at the bakery, as if trying to understand why the little room felt so different from whatever rooms he usually entered. Sweet Mercy was not fancy. The floorboards were old. The tables did not match. The wall near the kitchen had been repainted twice because Sarah kept testing colors and regretting them. There were cat food cans hidden under the back sink and a jar beside the register labeled Emergency Butter Fund. But it was warm. It smelled alive. People came in sad and left with sugar on their fingers. Sarah had built that with her own hands. Antonio seemed to feel it. "You own this building?" he asked. "I own the bakery. I rent the space. The apartments upstairs belong to my landlord, who believes maintenance is a spiritual concept. And downstairs?" Sarah paused. "Basement storage. Why? No reason." It was too smooth. Sarah leaned both hands on the counter. Antonio, his gaze sharpened slightly at his name in her mouth. "No mysterious basement questions in my bakery. I have had a long week." He nodded once. Fair. But his eyes moved again, briefly, toward the floor near the back hallway. Sarah saw it. She said nothing. That evening, after closing, the basement lock stuck again. It had been doing that for weeks, jamming whenever the air got damp. Sarah went downstairs with a flashlight, muttering at the landlord, the universe, and men who asked strange questions about storage rooms. The basement smelled like dust, old brick, sugar sacks, and cold metal. Most of the space was hers. Flower bins, seasonal decorations, extra tables, old chairs, a broken mixer she kept meaning to fix because throwing it away felt like betrayal. But at the far end was a storage room that had been locked since before she rented the place. The landlord had told her it was old building equipment. Nothing useful, nothing safe. The lock on that door was new. Sarah stood in front of it, flashlight raised. It was not just new, it was expensive. Heavy steel, recently oiled, no dust on the edges. "Oh, absolutely not," she whispered. A sound came from upstairs. Not loud, just a creak. Sarah turned off the flashlight. For a moment, the basement became pure darkness. Her breathing seemed too loud. Above her, floorboards shifted. One step, then another. Someone was inside the bakery. Sarah held still beside the locked door, one hand pressed against the brick wall. Her phone was in her apron pocket. The screen lit softly when she touched it. No signal, of course, because basements had a sense of humor. Another step overhead. Then a drawer opened. Sarah's heart began to pound in a slow, heavy rhythm. Not panic yet. Something colder. She thought of Antonio's eyes moving toward the floor. She thought of his question. And for the first time since opening Sweet Mercy, she wondered if the bakery had never really been only hers. The basement door at the top of the stairs groaned open. Light spilled down in a thin yellow line. Sarah moved backward without looking, and her shoulder hit the locked storage door. The metal gave a soft click. She froze. The expensive lock had not been locked at all. The door drifted open behind her, slow as a secret deciding it was tired of being kept. Inside the storage room, shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Not old pipes, not building equipment, boxes, hard drives, dusty black ledgers, sealed envelopes, a small safe with 3 dials. And on the nearest table, beneath a plastic cover, sat a stack of photographs showing men Sarah had seen only in newspaper shadows and restaurant corners. At the top of the stack was Antonio Genevese, younger, colder, standing beside an older man with the same eyes. Sarah forgot the footsteps above her. Then a voice came from the stairs, low and unfamiliar. "Find the files before Genevese does." Sarah stood in the dark with one hand over her mouth, surrounded by secrets that could get her killed, and all she could think was that Antonio had better like cannoli, because he was about to owe her a much bigger cleaning fee. Sarah Whitfield had spent most of her adult life believing the worst thing a person could find in a basement was mold, maybe a dead mouse, Maybe an unpaid city inspection notice taped to a pipe by a landlord who thought responsibility was a rumor. She had not prepared herself for Mafia ledgers, sealed envelopes, hard drives, photographs of dangerous men, and two strangers upstairs whispering about finding files before Antonio Genevese did. For one wild second, her brain tried to protect her by focusing on the wrong thing. There was dust on the safe, real dust, thick gray dust. Whoever had hidden all this had been careful enough to build a secret under her bakery, but not polite enough to clean. Sarah almost laughed, which she understood was a terrible instinct when strangers were breaking into her shop. She clapped a hand over her mouth and stood very still in the dark storage room while footsteps crossed the floor above her head. The men moved like they knew the bakery. That bothered her more than the break-in itself. One step near the register, one near the pastry case, then the scrape of something being dragged across the back hall. Sarah slowly backed deeper into the storage room, careful not to touch the shelves. Her phone still had no signal. Of course it did not. She was surrounded by evidence that could probably destroy half the state, and her phone had decided to become a decorative rectangle. The basement door at the top of the stairs creaked again. A beam of light moved across the steps. Sarah saw dust floating like tiny, frightened ghosts. Then a man started down. She did the only thing she could think of. She slipped behind the nearest shelf and grabbed a heavy black ledger with both hands. It was thick enough to be useful and old enough to have already lived through worse. If a man came close, she was going to hit him with organized crime accounting, which felt fair. The man reached the bottom step. His flashlight swept across flour bins, folded tablecloths, old cake stands, and the wall where the secret door had opened. Sarah held her breath. The storage room door remained cracked behind her, barely 2 inches. If he looked straight at it, she was done. Instead, he turned toward the main basement, his shoes clicking softly against the concrete. "Nothing down here," he called. "Check the back wall," another voice said from above. The man sighed. "I am checking the back wall." Sarah's grip tightened on the ledger. Her palms were sweaty. Her arms were beginning to ache. She told herself not to panic. Panic was loud. Panic knocked things over. Panic was for people who had not worked Black Friday cupcake pickups with 3 unpaid assistants and a bride crying because the buttercream roses were apparently too emotional. Sarah knew crisis. She knew how to breathe through it. She knew how to stay useful when her heart wanted to run. The man came closer. His flashlight slid across the hidden door. It stopped. Sarah closed her eyes. Then a crash came from upstairs so sudden and loud that both men cursed. A yowl followed it. A furious, insulted, dramatic yowl. Marmalade. The man with the flashlight spun toward the stairs. "What was that?" "A cat," the other man snapped. "That was not a cat. That was a ghost with opinions." Sarah almost kissed the stupid orange menace in her mind. The man hurried upstairs. The basement light disappeared with him. Sarah waited 1 second, 2, 3. Then she shoved the ledger under her arm, stepped out of the storage room, and pulled the door almost closed behind her. Almost. Not fully, because she had seen enough horror movies and landlord emails to know locked doors trapped people who needed to leave fast. Upstairs, one of the men shouted. Marmalade screamed again. Something else fell, probably the cookie jar shaped like a goose that Sarah hated, but customers loved. The back door slammed open. Sarah heard running feet, a scrape, another curse, and then a deeper sound from outside. A car door, an engine. Rain. Silence returned so fast it felt staged. Sarah waited in the basement for a long moment. Then her phone buzzed. Signal. 1 tiny bar. Enough for the universe to be rude. She opened her contacts, stared at the screen, and realized she did not have Antonio Genevese's number. Of course she did not. Sensible women did not exchange numbers with mafia bosses after selling them cannoli. Sensible women also did not stand in secret mafia archives holding ledgers like library books, but that part seemed less important now. She called the police. Her thumb hovered over the emergency button, then she stopped. Find the files before Genevese does. If the men were afraid of Antonio finding the files, and if Antonio had already noticed the basement, then calling regular police might not be simple. Maybe she was being paranoid. Maybe this was exactly when people in movies got themselves killed by thinking too much. But Sarah had lived long enough to know that systems moved slowly when you needed them, and very quickly when they wanted to make you the problem. She had broken into nothing, stolen nothing, and yet she was standing in a room full of dangerous secrets under her own bakery. That sounded like the kind of thing that would somehow become her fault. So she called the number printed on the cannoli order slip. Antonio had left it in sharp black ink beneath his name. He answered on the first ring. Sweet Mercy Bakery, Sarah whispered before he could speak, because apparently her survival instincts still came with customer service. There was a pause, then his voice, low and instantly alert. Sarah? Good. You do know how phones work. That is comforting. What happened? Oh, nothing much. Someone broke into my bakery. My cat may have committed minor assault, and I found your creepy basement scrapbook. Silence. Not empty silence. Dangerous silence. The kind that made the air around her phone feel colder. Where are you? Antonio asked. In the basement. Are they still there? I don't think so. You don't think so. I didn't exactly offer them coffee and ask for a sign-out sheet. Stay where you are. Do not touch anything. Sarah looked down at the ledger under her arm. Too late, her face said, though her mouth remained smarter. I am on my way, he said. Great. Bring answers. And maybe a mop. Your life is very messy. Sarah. The way he said her name stopped her. Quiet. Firm. Not angry exactly. Afraid, maybe, though Antonio Genevese sounded like a man who would rather chew glass than admit fear. Lock yourself in the storage room until I arrive. I just came out of the storage room. Go back in. It is full of files that apparently make people break into bakeries. That is why you go back in. Sarah looked toward the dark doorway. The safe sat inside like a patient animal. The shelves waited. The old photographs stared from the table. No, she said. Another silence. Shorter this time. Sharper. No? Antonio repeated. I am not locking myself in the murder basement. It is not a murder basement. You do not get to brand the basement right now. Sarah, listen to me. No, you listen. This is my bakery. My building. At least until my landlord ruins my life. My basement. My cat. My ruined goose cookie jar. I will wait upstairs with lights on, rolling pin ready, and the front door locked. If someone comes back, I'm leaving through the alley. You should already be leaving. And abandon the evidence cave under my cupcakes? Absolutely not. I have watched too many women in true crime episodes make worse choices with less information. He exhaled through the phone. You are impossible. That is what men say when women don't obey fast enough. The words left her mouth before she softened them. They landed hard. Sarah knew they did, because Antonio did not answer immediately. When he spoke again, the command had been removed from his voice with visible effort. Then do what keeps you safest, he said. But keep the line open. That small change bothered her. Not because it was bad, because it was good, because he had heard her. Men with power rarely heard correction unless it came with a gun. Sarah climbed the stairs slowly, phone in one hand, ledger in the other. The bakery looked like a raccoon had hosted a meeting. 2 chairs were overturned. The goose cookie jar had shattered across the floor. Sugar packets were everywhere. Marmalade sat on the counter beside the register, orange tail twitching, looking proud and offended. You broke the goose, Sarah whispered. Marmalade blinked. Fine. It was ugly, but still. Antonio stayed on the line. She could hear movement around him now. Car doors. A low order given away from the phone. The hard quiet of men reacting fast. What do you see? He asked. A mess. No broken front glass. They came through the back. Cash drawer is open, but nothing looks stolen. They were not there for cash. Yes, thank you, Professor Doom. I got that. What did you take from the room? Sarah froze. Antonio's voice lowered. Sarah. She looked at the ledger tucked against her body. A book. What kind of book? The kind that makes me wish I had chosen dentistry. Describe it. Black leather. Heavy. Old. Handwritten numbers. Some names. Some initials. A lot of dates. One page has Genevese at the top, which is either you or an alarming coincidence. Antonio said something in Italian under his breath. It did not sound like a blessing. Put it somewhere safe, he said. I thought I wasn't supposed to touch anything. You already touched it. Wow. Flexible leadership. Hide it. Not in the basement. Sarah looked around. The bakery had many hiding places, but most were terrible. Under the counter, in the flour bin, behind the espresso machine. Then her eyes landed on the ugliest thing she owned. A decorative fake wedding cake in the front window, 3 foam tiers covered in old white fondant and silk roses. She had bought it second-hand for display and hated it every day since. She crossed to the window, lifted the top tier, shoved the ledger inside the hollow center, and replaced it. I put it somewhere no sane person would check, she said. Where? My wedding cake. Another pause. You have a wedding cake. A fake one. Why? Because people like imagining expensive decisions. Outside, tires hissed against the wet street. A black car turned the corner so fast, water sprayed up from the curb. Antonio stepped out before it fully stopped. 2 men came with him this time, both serious, both armed under their coats in a way Sarah did not need to see to understand. Antonio did not knock. Sarah unlocked the door, and he entered like a storm that had learned manners at gunpoint. His eyes went to her first. Not the room, not the broken cookie jar. Her. Are you hurt? He asked. No. He looked anyway. Face, hands, arms, throat, like he was counting visible damage. Sarah felt suddenly too seen and hated that her cheeks warmed. I said I'm not hurt. I heard you. You're still looking. I am confirming. That is looking with paperwork. One of the men behind him coughed into his fist. Antonio did not turn, but the man instantly stopped. Antonio's gaze dropped to Marmalade, who was now licking powdered sugar off the counter. This is the cat? This is Marmalade. He is not my cat. He is an independent criminal who eats here. Marmalade stared at Antonio with the calm disrespect of an animal who feared no government. He helped? Antonio asked. He destroyed a goose and maybe saved my life. Mixed performance. Antonio looked at the broken ceramic pieces, then at the back door. His face became cold enough to change the room. He gave orders to his men in a quiet voice. One went to check the alley. The other disappeared into the basement. Sarah watched them move through her bakery and felt a strange anger rise under the fear. They were careful, yes. Professional, yes. But this was still her space, her little tables, her pastry case, her flour on the floor. Antonio must have seen her expression because he turned back. No one takes anything without your permission, he said. Sarah folded her arms. That better includes secrets you apparently stored under my shop. His face did not change, but his eyes did. They were not supposed to be here, he said. Oh, perfect. The illegal basement chose me randomly. That's much better. Antonio walked to the counter, slowly enough not to crowd her. My father owned this building through a company no one connected to us. Years ago, he used the basement for private records. After he died, some things disappeared. We thought they were destroyed. Surprise, Sarah said weakly. They were under my sprinkle inventory. Antonio looked toward the basement door. If those files are what I think they are, people will kill for them. People already broke in for them. Yes, she waited. He looked back. Sarah lifted both eyebrows. That was the part where a normal person apologizes. Antonio went still. Then, quietly, I am sorry. The words were simple. No excuse attached. That made them harder to reject. Sarah looked away first. Well, good. Terrible timing, but emotionally healthy. One of Antonio's men came up from the basement carrying a small stack of folders in gloved hands. "Boss," he said, "it's real." Antonio's jaw tightened. "How much?" "Enough." That word seemed to settle over the bakery like smoke. Sarah hugged herself. Enough for what? Antonio did not answer right away. He looked at the pastry case, at the pink walls, at the handwritten sign for strawberry shortcake cupcakes, at the table where two old women usually sat every morning and judged everyone kindly. When he spoke, his voice was softer, enough to break a peace that has kept 3 families from war for 7 years. Sarah laughed once, not because it was funny, but because the alternative was screaming. Of course my basement has war files. Why would it be normal? Why would it be coupons? Antonio stepped closer, then stopped before he got too near. "Sarah, I need to move you somewhere secure." "No, you cannot stay here tonight." "Probably true. I have a safe house." "Absolutely not." His eyes narrowed. "You don't know what that means." "I know exactly what that means. It means a place controlled by you, guarded by your men, where everyone tells me it is for my protection, while quietly deciding what I can do, where I can go, and whether I'm allowed to be upset about it." Something in his face shifted. Sarah's voice softened despite herself. "I am scared." "I am not stupid." "No," he said, "you are not." That should not have felt like a gift, but it did. Sarah had heard many versions of surprise when people discovered she could think fast, count faster, or refuse shame before it entered the room. Antonio did not sound surprised. He sounded certain, as if he had known it from the beginning and had only been waiting for everyone else to catch up. "My apartment is upstairs," she said. 2 locks, fire escape. Marmalade knows the roof. If your people need to watch the building, fine. But I sleep in my own bed." Antonio looked like every instinct in his body hated that answer. Then he nodded once. "Fine." Sarah blinked. "Fine? Your bed. My guards outside. No one enters unless you approve. Basement sealed, front and back covered." She stared at him. "You agreed too fast. I don't trust it." "I can argue if it comforts you. It does not. But thank you for offering terrible service." His mouth moved faintly, the almost smile again. It arrived at the worst times, which made it worse. They spent the next hour turning her bakery into something that felt half crime scene, half fortress. Antonio's men fixed the back door temporarily, swept for devices, photographed the basement, and carried several boxes upstairs only after Sarah made them write down exactly what they touched. Antonio watched her create a list on receipt paper and did not laugh. When she demanded names from his men, they gave them. Rocco, tall and bald with kind eyes he clearly tried to hide. Nico, younger, sharp-faced, quiet, and very confused by Marmalade's refusal to move from the counter. "You keep receipts for Mafia evidence?" Antonio asked. "I keep receipts for everything. You don't trust anyone. I trust invoices. People get poetic when they lie. Numbers are less creative." Antonio looked at her like she had just said something important. "You're a bookkeeper, part-time, for small businesses. Mostly people who think taxes are a seasonal curse." He turned toward the folders. "Then you may understand these better than most of my men." Sarah looked at the ledgers. Her stomach turned. That sounded like a job offer from hell. It was not an offer. Good. It was a warning. Worse. Antonio leaned one hand on the counter, suddenly looking tired again. The cold public face slipped just a little. "The ledgers may contain coded payments, false company names, transfer routes, favors owed, betrayals buried. My father trusted paper because he did not trust men. If someone else finds what he wrote before I do, they can twist every family against the others. And you? I can stop it." Sarah studied him. "Can you?" His gaze held hers. "I have to." There it was again. Not pride. Burden. The kind a person did not put down because they no longer knew who they were without it. Against every sensible part of herself, Sarah reached into the fake wedding cake and pulled out the black ledger. Rocco made a small choking sound, like watching evidence come out of a window display had damaged him personally. Antonio stared at the cake. "That is where you hid it? No one respects bridal decor enough to search it." He took the ledger carefully, but Sarah did not let go at first. "If I help you read this," she said, "and I am saying if, with a lot of emotional distance, then we do this my way too. No lying unless it keeps someone alive. No treating me like furniture. No calling me brave in that tragic voice men use when they are about to ignore a woman's opinion." Antonio's hand covered the other side of the ledger, not touching her, close enough that she felt the heat of him. "What do you want?" he asked. "The truth. Rent for the basement if your dead father has been using it. Payment for damages. Protection that does not feel like prison. And when I ask a question, you answer it like I have a brain." He did not smile. "Done. Also, nobody kills anyone in my bakery." "That may be difficult, Antonio. I will do my best. Try harder." This time, he smiled for real. Small, tired, beautiful in an annoying way that Sarah planned to resent later when she had more time. By midnight, the bakery lights were off, but Sarah's apartment above it glowed warm and yellow. Antonio sat at her tiny kitchen table with his sleeves rolled to the elbows, looking absurdly out of place beside a chipped mug that said, "Need me alone." A ledger lay open between them. Sarah had changed into soft black leggings and an oversized blue sweater, then immediately regretted caring what she looked like. Antonio had not looked away from her once because of her body. Not in disgust, not in pity, not in that fake generous way some men looked at plus-size women when they wanted credit for basic attraction. He looked at her like she was a problem he wanted to understand, and a woman he was trying not to want. It was dangerous how good that felt. Rocco stood by the window. Marmalade sat on the fridge, watching him like a tiny orange landlord. Sarah tapped the ledger page with a pencil. "These are not regular numbers." "I know. No, I mean they're pretending to be regular numbers. See this column? It looks like shipment weight, but the totals are wrong." Antonio leaned closer. He smelled like rain, clean soap, and something darker Sarah chose not to think about. "How wrong?" he asked. "Too wrong to be a mistake. Consistently wrong. That means the wrongness is the point." Rocco looked over. "What does that mean?" "It means whoever wrote this used the difference between the real total and the fake total as the message. Here, 12 missing. Here, 8. Here, 19. Sarah wrote the numbers on a napkin. 12, 8, 19. L, H, S, maybe. Or dates. Or initials. Your father liked codes?" Antonio's face shadowed. "My father liked control. Same family, different outfit." He was quiet for a moment. "Yes." Sarah glanced at him, surprised by the honesty. She had expected defense. Most sons of powerful men carried their fathers like statues, even when the statues had crushed half the garden. She turned the page. There are 3 initials that repeat. G, L, B. Genevese, Lucasi, Banano? Yes. The payments are moving between fake vendors, but the patterns shift when Lucasi appears. See? Banano money is messy. Late, rounded, emotional almost. Genevese money is clean. Too clean, sorry, not flattering. But Lucasi transfers land between both, like a bridge. Antonio's eyes sharpened. A bridge or a leak? Sarah felt a soft chill move across her arms. Maybe both. Rocco's phone buzzed. He checked it, then looked at Antonio. "Isabella Lucasi is asking for you." "Third time tonight." The name changed the room. Sarah pretended to study the page. Isabella Lucasi. That would be the arranged marriage woman. Antonio looked at her. Yes. Beautiful daughter of a dying Mafia don. Future symbol of peace. Probably owns shoes that hate poor people. Rocco coughed again. Antonio looked at him. Rocco looked out the window very hard. "It is not a real engagement," Antonio said. Sarah's pencil paused. "I did not ask." "No, but your pencil got violent." She looked down. The tip had snapped against the paper. Annoying. "I don't care who you marry," she said. "That is clearly untrue." Her face warmed. "Do not become smug in my kitchen. It's unattractive." His gaze softened. "I am expected to marry her. I did not say I wanted to." Sarah should have let that pass. She did not. "And what do you want?" The question slipped out too quietly. For a moment, Antonio said nothing. The city hummed outside her windows. Rain ticked against the glass. Downstairs, her bakery held secrets beneath its sugar. Somewhere in New Jersey, dangerous people were waking up to the idea that Sarah Whitfield had become inconvenient. Antonio looked at her across the little table. "I have not wanted anything for myself in a long time," he said. That answer reached places it had no right to reach. Sarah looked away first. "Well, that sounds unhealthy. Have a cookie." She pushed a plate toward him. He took one without argument. After that night, Antonio came back every evening, not always for long. Sometimes he arrived after midnight with his coat damp and his face carved from stress. Sometimes he came at 7, when the bakery still smelled like warm sugar, and the last customers were leaving with pink boxes tied in string. He called the visits security checks. Sarah called them suspicious cannoli inspections. He stood near the counter while she closed the register. He carried flour sacks, even after she told him rich mafia bosses lifting wholesale baking supplies made the economy feel confused. He scared away a man who yelled at Sarah because his online coupon had expired 3 years earlier. Sarah told him intimidation was not an approved customer service method. Antonio said it was effective. Sarah said so was arson, but she still did not recommend it. Slowly, without either of them admitting it, the ledgers became their excuse. Sarah decoded payment trails at her kitchen table. Antonio brought names, dates, and pieces of history he clearly hated sharing. She learned that the Genevese family controlled ports and trucking. The Lucasi family controlled unions, construction, and old political favors. The Banano family controlled gambling, clubs, and men too reckless to keep records unless someone forced them. The peace between them had been built after blood, sealed with fear, and dressed up as tradition. The arranged marriage between Antonio and Isabella was supposed to make the peace permanent. Sarah did not like any of it. "You people ever try therapy?" she asked one night. Antonio looked up from a folder. "For 3 mafia families? Group rate." He looked amused despite himself. "I will suggest it at the next sit-down. Please do. I want to hear how fast the room gets weird." There were moments like that, soft enough to make her forget the danger for a few breaths. Antonio holding a piping bag like it had insulted his ancestors. Antonio carefully twisting cannoli shells into boxes, while Sarah told him he had the delicate touch of a man defusing a bomb. Antonio standing in her kitchen, dusting powdered sugar from his sleeve, looking more peaceful than he seemed to understand. But danger kept returning. A black car outside the bakery. A man who asked too many questions about basement storage. A brick through the side window at 2 in the morning, with a note wrapped around it. "Give back what does not belong to you." Sarah read the note twice, then looked at Antonio. "Technically, that could be about my neighbor's mixing bowl." Antonio took the paper from her hand. His face had gone very still. "Do not joke." "I joke when I'm scared." His eyes lifted to hers. The anger in them softened into something worse. Concern. Sarah hated how much she wanted to step closer. "I will increase security," he said. "You will not turn my bakery into a bunker. Someone threw a brick through your window. Yes, and I am upset. But I still sell cupcakes to children, Antonio. I can't have armed men glaring beside the snickerdoodles. They can glare outside." "Fine, but friendly glaring." He looked toward Rocco. "Can you glare friendly?" Rocco sighed. "No." Sarah pointed at him. "Practice." Then Isabella Lucasi walked into Sweet Mercy 2 days later, and the bakery changed temperature. Sarah knew it was her, before anyone said the name. Some women entered rooms like they had been invited. Isabella entered like the room had been built late, and owed her an apology. She was tall, slim, and painfully elegant, with dark hair pulled smooth, a cream coat over her shoulders, and diamonds small enough to pretend they were tasteful. 2 women came behind her. Assistants, maybe. Witnesses, probably. Sarah was arranging cupcakes in the front case when Isabella stopped near the counter and looked around the bakery with a faint smile. "Charming," Isabella said. Sarah placed a strawberry cupcake in line with the others. "That means small when rich people say it." Isabella's eyes moved to her, slowly, down and up, the way some women looked when they wanted their cruelty to seem like observation. "You must be Sarah. And you must be Isabella." The smile sharpened. "Antonio mentioned you. Did he? I hope I was expensive in the story." Isabella glanced at the cupcake tray. He always had unusual taste when he was tired. There it was. Not loud, not ugly enough to call out easily. Just a silk ribbon wrapped around a knife. Sarah felt the old familiar heat rise under her skin. She had heard versions of that sentence her whole life. Unusual taste, brave choice, pretty face, confident for her size. People could make an insult sound like perfume if they were trained well enough. Sarah picked up another cupcake. Her hand stayed steady. "People eat what they like here," she said. "Not what looks good on someone else's plate." Isabella's eyes cooled. "You're funny, not by accident. I can see why he's entertained." Sarah looked at her fully then. "Careful. That sounded like you were trying to make me feel small." Isabella smiled. "Could I?" The bakery went quiet. Even the customer by the window stopped stirring her coffee. Before Sarah could answer, Antonio's voice came from the door. "No." Sarah turned. He stood just inside, wearing black again, rain on his shoulders, eyes fixed on Isabella, with a coldness Sarah had never seen aimed at her. Rocco stood behind him. Marmalade, traitor that he was, immediately jumped down from the windowsill and walked toward Antonio like they had an understanding. Isabella did not look surprised. "Antonio, Isabella, I came to see the bakery everyone is discussing." "No, you came to measure Sarah." Isabella laughed softly. "And if I did?" Antonio moved closer, but not too close. He did not stand in front of Sarah. Sarah noticed that. He stood beside her, like an answer, not a shield. "Then measure correctly," he said. "She is not a joke. She is not a weakness. And she is not available for your little performances." Something flickered in Isabella's face. Not hurt. Calculation. Sarah should have felt triumphant. She mostly felt tired. Women like Isabella did not attack unless they were afraid of losing something. Isabella looked from Antonio to Sarah and back again. "You are making this more dangerous than it has to be." "No," Sarah said before Antonio could answer. "I think it was already dangerous. I just got loud enough to notice." Isabella's gaze settled on her. For 1 second, the polished mask thinned, and Sarah saw something beneath it. Anger, fear, hunger. Not for Antonio, maybe. For escape, for power. For some future she thought everyone else had stolen from her. Then Isabella smiled again. "Enjoy the attention, Sarah. Men like Antonio are very intense when they discover something new. But eventually, peace matters more than dessert." She left without buying anything. Sarah watched her go. "I hate when villains have good coats." Antonio looked at her. "She is dangerous." "I guessed. You should not have challenged her." Sarah turned. "There it is." "What?" "The tone. The one where you decide my safety means I should become quieter." His jaw tightened. "That is not what I meant." "It is exactly what you meant. You just put a nicer suit on it." Antonio looked away, then back at her. His voice lowered. "I am trying to keep you alive. And I am trying to stay myself while alive. Both matter." The words seemed to strike him harder than she intended. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, quietly, "You're right." Sarah blinked. "I am?" "Yes." That was fast. I had more prepared. His mouth softened. I'm sure you did. She looked at him, and for a second the whole bakery seemed to fade around them. The broken window had been repaired. The cupcakes were cooling. Rain whispered against the glass. Antonio stood close enough that she could see the faint, tired lines near his eyes, the small cut near his thumb, the effort it took him not to reach for control every time fear entered the room. And because Sarah was reckless in very specific ways, she said, "You know, for a terrifying man, you learn occasionally." His eyes warmed. Occasionally? I'm leaving room for growth. He took one step closer, slow enough for her to stop him. She did not. The air between them changed, not sharply, softly, like a match being struck behind a closed hand. "Sarah," he said. The bell above the door rang before anything else could happen. Nico entered fast, face tense. "Boss, we traced the shell company from the ledgers. It points Banano, but the transfer authorization came through a Lucasi account." Antonio's face hardened. "Who signed?" Nico glanced at Sarah, then back at Antonio. "Not Don Lucasi." Sarah already knew before he said it. "Isabella," Antonio said. Nico nodded. "And there's more. The account links to Marco Banano." Antonio became very still. Sarah felt the chill again. "Marco is the reckless son, right?" "Yes," Antonio said. "And if Isabella is moving money through him, then the wedding is not the peace plan." Sarah looked at the ledger open on the counter, at the numbers that had started to make a terrible kind of sense. "It's the distraction." Antonio's eyes met hers. Outside, across the street, a man in a grey hoodie stood under the awning of a closed pharmacy, looking straight at the bakery. Sarah saw him just as his phone lifted to his ear, then the bakery lights went out. For one breath, everything became dark sugar, rain, and silence. Antonio's hand found Sarah's wrist, gentle but immediate, not pulling, not trapping, just there. From the alley behind the shop, glass broke, and from somewhere below their feet, deep inside the basement Sarah had never wanted, the safe began to beep. The safe under Sarah Whitfield's bakery began to beep like it had been waiting years for the worst possible moment to become dramatic. The lights were out. The front window was black with rain. The alley behind the shop had just filled with the sound of breaking glass, and Antonio Genevese had one hand around Sarah's wrist, so gently that the softness of it frightened her more than if he had grabbed her hard. He was not pulling her. He was not forcing her behind him. He was simply making sure she was still there in the dark. For half a breath, Sarah could feel his pulse through his fingers. Slow, controlled. Too controlled for a man whose life had just turned into a very expensive haunted house with cannoli. "Tell me that is your toaster," Sarah whispered. Antonio's voice came from beside her, low and calm. "That is not my toaster." "Great. I hate that answer." Something moved in the alley. A shadow crossed the back window, then another. Nico cursed near the counter. Rocco was already moving, silent and heavy in the dark. Antonio let go of Sarah's wrist only long enough to place her hand on the edge of the pastry case, grounding her there like he knew sudden darkness could make a room lose its shape. "Stay low," he said. Sarah crouched behind the counter. That sounded very close to an order. It was a request wearing a bulletproof vest. Fine. Better. Glass cracked again at the back. The beep from below became faster. Not loud. Not yet. But steady enough to make Sarah's stomach twist. Somewhere beneath the floor, inside the secret room she had never asked for, old metal was counting down. She knew that sound from the bakery oven when the timer reached its last minute, cheerful and harmless and usually followed by lemon cake. This was not lemon cake. This was something colder. Antonio moved toward the back hallway. Sarah reached out and grabbed his sleeve before she could think better of it. He stopped instantly. "Do not go down there alone," she said. His head turned slightly. Even in the dark, she could feel him looking at her. "There may be something inside the safe," he said. "Yes, that is why I used the word alone." A flash of light swept across the front window. Then the emergency bulbs flickered on, weak and red, making the bakery look unreal. Sugar jars, cupcake trays, broken shadows, Antonio's face cut in crimson light. Nico was by the door with his weapon drawn. Rocco returned from the alley, jaw tight. "2 men out back," Rocco said. "One ran. One is bleeding but alive." They were trying to get into the basement access from the alley. "The safe?" Antonio asked. "Remote trigger, maybe. Or delayed after the basement door opened." Sarah stared at them. "Remote trigger? Like bomb remote trigger? Are we using bomb words now?" Antonio's eyes met hers. "It may not be explosives." "That sentence has too much room in it." The beeping sped up again. Antonio looked at Rocco. "Clear the building." "No," Sarah said at once. All 3 men looked at her. She pointed toward the ceiling. "Mrs. Delaney is upstairs with a bad hip and a dog that hates stairs. Mr. Rosario is in 2B and takes sleeping pills. Lena's cousin is in 3A with a baby. You do not get to clear my building like it is a chessboard. Those are people." Antonio looked at her for 1 second, and Sarah saw the war inside him. The old instinct wanted to move fast, cut corners, take control, survive first, explain later. Then something shifted. He nodded. "Names and apartments," he said. Sarah gave them fast. Antonio did not question. He did not ask how she knew every tenant's medication, schedule, pets, or weaknesses. Of course she knew. They bought birthday cakes downstairs. They borrowed sugar. They cried at her tables. People became Sarah's problem the minute they entered her orbit, whether she liked it or not. Nico ran upstairs. Rocco went to the rear entrance. Antonio moved toward the basement door, and Sarah moved with him. "No," he said softly. "You are not leaving me next to windows while men break glass and the basement screams. It is safer here. No, it is easier for you here. Different thing." That stopped him. His jaw tightened, but not with anger, with effort. "Stay behind me," he said. "I can do behind." They went down the basement stairs together with a flashlight between them and the safe beeping beneath their feet like a nervous heart. The storage room door stood open. Inside, the shelves looked stranger now, under the red emergency glow. Ledgers, drives, envelopes. The past stacked neatly by men who believed paper could make them immortal. The safe sat on the table in the center, 3 dials turning slowly by themselves. Sarah hated that more than anything. Machinery should not look thoughtful. Antonio crouched in front of it. "My father's safe. That sounds like a terrible family heirloom." "It is." The display blinked with 6 blank lines and a small red light. "Can you open it?" she asked. "No." Comforting. "My father changed codes often." Sarah moved closer. "What happens if we enter the wrong one?" Antonio glanced at the beeping display. "We find out." "That is not a plan." A muffled shout came from upstairs. Rocco answered. Footsteps thudded above them. The building was waking. The safe beeped faster. Sarah stared at the dials, the old ledgers, the columns of strange numbers she had spent nights translating. Wrong totals, hidden gaps, difference as message. Her mind reached for patterns, because fear gave it nothing useful. Antonio's father liked control. He liked paper. He liked family names turned into numbers. He hid messages and errors because he trusted no one to read mistakes closely. "Move," Sarah said. Antonio looked at her. "Please move." That was a request in a cardigan. He shifted aside. Sarah crouched in front of the safe. Her hands shook, so she pressed them against her thighs until they stopped enough to work. 6 blanks. Not a date, maybe. Not initials. The ledger on the table beside the safe was open to the last page she had examined. Genevese, Lucasi, Banano. The missing weights formed numbers. 12, 8, 19, then 3, 15, 4, 5. Letters. L, H, S, C, O, D, E. She whispered it before she realized. LHS code. Antonio leaned closer. "What?" "Left-hand side code." Your father wrote it like a bookkeeping note, but it was a direction. Left-hand side. The left side of the ledger. She flipped back through the heavy pages. The safe kept beeping. Antonio stayed beside her, silent now. Not because he had nothing to say, because he knew enough not to crowd her mind. Sarah found the left column, not totals, dates. The same 3 dates repeated under different companies. 7 years ago, the night of the peace agreement, the day Antonio's father died, the day Isabella's mother disappeared from public view. 6 digits from the dates lined up too neatly to ignore. Sarah entered them. The safe stopped beeping. The silence that followed felt almost violent. Then the door clicked open. Sarah exhaled so hard she nearly sat on the floor. "I need a raise." Antonio looked at her with something close to awe. "You saved the building." "I saved my oven." The building was nearby. Inside the safe were 3 things: a silver flash drive, a bundle of letters tied with black string, and a small recorder wrapped in cloth. Antonio picked up the recorder first. His hand changed around it, like it weighed more than metal. "My father used these," he said, when he did not trust a meeting. The ceiling thudded above them again. Nico shouted Antonio's name from upstairs. Antonio stood. "We go." They made it halfway up before the back door burst open. The next seconds came in fragments. Rocco shouting. A man in a grey hoodie lunging through the rear hall. Nico firing once into the ceiling to stop another man from entering. Sarah pressed against the wall near the basement stairs with the recorder clutched in one hand, because apparently she had become the kind of woman who escaped raids while holding Mafia audio equipment. Antonio moved like all the softness had been folded away and locked somewhere deep. He disarmed the first man without drama. No shouting, no wasted motion, just a twist, a strike, a body hitting tile hard enough to end the conversation. Sarah should have been terrified of him then. She was. But not for herself. That difference made everything worse. Another man ran from the alley, and Marmalade launched himself from the counter with a scream that could have emptied a church. The man cursed and stumbled. Rocco caught him by the collar and slammed him against the wall. Sarah stared. "That cat is getting tuna." Antonio looked over his shoulder. "He has earned it." Then the front door opened. Isabella Lucasi walked in wearing a pale coat and no expression at all. Everyone stopped. Not because she was the strongest person in the room, because she had timed it perfectly. Behind her stood 2 men Sarah did not know, and one she did from photos. Marco Banano, younger than Antonio, handsome in a restless, reckless way, with anger in his eyes and heartbreak hiding under it badly. He looked at the men on the floor, then at Sarah, then at Antonio. "This looks unfortunate," Isabella said. Sarah, still holding the recorder, looked at her. "You came all the way here for commentary?" Isabella's eyes flicked to the object in Sarah's hand, a tiny movement, barely there. Antonio saw it. So did Sarah. The bakery became very quiet. "Give me what you took from the safe," Isabella said. Antonio stepped forward. "You triggered it," Isabella smiled faintly. "Your father built dramatic precautions, not me. You knew the code would be hidden in the ledgers. I knew your father was paranoid enough to leave a key near a lock, and sentimental enough to think his son would someday understand him." Marco looked at her sharply. "You said the files belonged to Banano." "They do," Isabella said without looking at him. Sarah stared between them, and the pattern clicked so hard it almost made a sound. Marco was angry, but not in control. Isabella stood like the room belonged to her. Marco stood like he had been dragged into his own plan 2 steps too late. "Oh," Sarah said softly. "You poor handsome idiot." Marco's eyes snapped to her. "What?" Sarah pointed the recorder at Isabella. "She told you Antonio was going to use the files against your family, didn't she? She told you this marriage would make Genevese and Lucasi too strong. She told you if you helped her steal the ledgers, you could stop Antonio before he buried you." Marco's face changed. Isabella's did not. Sarah kept going because fear had turned into clarity, and clarity made her mouth dangerous. But the transfer authorizations were Lucasi. The fake vendors bridged Lucasi to Banano. The mistakes were too neat. You were never the mastermind. You were the match. She needed your family's fingerprints on the fire. Marco turned to Isabella. Tell me she's lying. Isabella looked bored. Sarah is clever with numbers, not with people. Sarah smiled without warmth. Sweetheart, I run a bakery. I understand people before coffee. Marco took one step back from Isabella. Not enough, but it was the first crack. Then Isabella's eyes went cold. Enough. Take her. The men moved. Antonio did too. But Isabella was ready for Antonio. One of her men raised his gun toward the ceiling, not at him, toward the apartments above, toward Mrs. Delaney and the baby and everyone Sarah had named. Antonio froze instantly. Isabella smiled. You have always been predictable when innocent people are nearby. Sarah felt the blood leave her face. Antonio's eyes stayed on Isabella. Let them leave. They can, once I have Sarah and the files. No, Antonio said. Sarah looked at him, then at the ceiling, then at the armed man's finger near the trigger. She hated every choice in front of her, so she made her own. I'll go, she said. Antonio turned his head. Sarah, no, don't do the growly name thing. It's not useful. Isabella's smile returned. Smart girl. Sarah looked at her. Do not call me girl unless you want your last meal to be attitude. Marco stared at her, as if he could not decide whether she was brave or insane. Antonio moved one step toward her, and Sarah lifted her hand. Just slightly. Stop. The same way she would stop a customer from touching a cake before the icing set. He stopped. His face was unreadable to everyone else. To Sarah, suddenly, it was not. She saw rage, terror, trust, maybe, though it hurt him. She walked to Isabella with the recorder in her hand and the flash drive tucked into the waistband of her leggings, where no elegant villain would immediately check, because elegant villains rarely believed fat women had hiding places worth respecting. Isabella took the recorder. Sarah let her. Search her, Isabella said. One of the men moved forward. Sarah stared him down. Touch anything that requires dinner first, and I will make this weird for both of us. The man hesitated. Isabella sighed. Just bring her. They dragged Sarah into the rain through the alley behind her own bakery. Antonio did not move, not because he did not care, because the gun was still pointed up, because Sarah had asked him to stop, because, for once, a powerful man had to survive the agony of not making the decision for her. That was the part Sarah held on to in the van, while Marco sat across from her, silent and pale with fury, and Isabella stared at the recorder like it was a crown. They took her to a warehouse near the water, where the air smelled like rust, salt, old wood, and bad decisions. Sarah's hands were tied in front of her, which she considered insulting but workable. Isabella stood near a table under one hanging light. Marco paced behind her like a man trying to outrun the truth. Open the drive, Isabella said. Sarah sat in the metal chair and looked around. No snacks? Hostage work has really gone downhill, Marco snapped. This is not funny. No, but if I stop being funny, I start screaming, and nobody wants the acoustics in here tested. Isabella placed the flash drive on the table. Sarah's stomach tightened. They had found it. Fine. Fine was a generous word, but she used it anyway. Fine meant she still had her brain. You decoded his ledgers, Isabella said. You can open this. Maybe. You will. Sarah leaned back. I charge hourly. Isabella's smile vanished. Do you think Antonio will save you because he wants you? Sarah felt the sting under the question. Not because she doubted Antonio, because Isabella knew exactly where to press. Women like her always did. She looked at Sarah's body, at the chair, at the soft stomach Sarah had spent years learning not to apologize for, at the wrists tied with rope, at the flower still caught under one nail. Men like Antonio want what challenges them, Isabella continued, for a while. But men like him marry women who fit beside power. Sarah's throat tightened. The old cruel voices rose. School hallways, dating apps. Aunt Linda asking if she really needed another role at Thanksgiving. Customers calling her confident, like it was a circus trick. She let it all rise. Then she let it pass. "Isabella," Sarah said gently, "you are way too smart to believe pretty is the same thing as powerful." Marco stopped pacing. Isabella's eyes narrowed. Sarah leaned forward as much as the rope allowed. "You do not want Antonio. You never did. You want the room that comes with him. You want all those old men to stop trading you like a peace offering in heels. Honestly, fair. I would be furious too. But you picked the laziest kind of freedom. You tried to become the person holding the leash instead of cutting it." For the first time, Isabella's face cracked. "Not much. Enough," Marco whispered. "Is that true?" She turned on him. "Do not start." Sarah looked at Marco. "She loves you. Maybe. Maybe not cleanly. But she was always going to let your family take the blame. The money trail is too clean because she wanted it found after the damage was done. Marco Banano, reckless son, starts war over jealousy. Isabella Lucasi, poor betrayed bride, survives chaos and inherits sympathy. Very elegant, very terrible." Marco stared at Isabella. "You said we would leave after." "And go where?" Isabella snapped. "To some little house with your family hunting us, and mine burying my name. Grow up. Love without power is just another cage." Sarah felt a strange sadness move through her. There it was, the wound under all the diamonds. The warehouse door opened. Every head turned. Antonio walked in alone. No army, no shouting, no storm of bullets. Just Antonio in a dark coat, rain on his shoulders, hands visible, face calm enough to make the room afraid of what calm meant. Marco pulled his gun. Antonio did not look at him. His eyes found Sarah first. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Sarah's breath caught. Then she lifted her tied hands. Emotionally annoyed, relief flashed across his face so fast, only she could see it. Isabella laughed. "You came alone." Antonio looked at her. "Sarah taught me that bringing more power into a room does not always make it safer." That landed in Sarah's chest so hard she nearly forgot the rope. Marco's gun shook. "You should have brought men." "No," Antonio said. "You should have brought truth." Isabella's expression hardened, but Marco looked at Sarah. That was the mistake Isabella had not planned for. Sarah had already moved him. Not fully, but enough. "The recorder is empty," Sarah said. Isabella went still. Antonio's eyes shifted to her. Sarah shrugged. "Well, not empty. It has your father saying some dramatic things about betrayal and family honor, which is very on brand. But the useful audio, that copied to the drive when the safe opened, the drive copied to the bakery laptop, because I backed up the ledger software every 12 minutes after the brick came through my window. Automatic sync, cloud storage. Very boring, very effective." Antonio's mouth moved slightly. Sarah looked at Isabella. "You kidnapped a fat baker bookkeeper with Mafia evidence and cloud storage. That is not exactly genius behavior." Marco let out one shocked laugh before he could stop it. Isabella's face twisted. "You stupid woman." "No," Antonio said quietly. The words stopped the room. He stepped closer, still slow, still careful. "You can insult me. You can threaten me. You can try to turn 3 families into ash, but you do not speak to her like that." Sarah should not have felt warm while tied to a chair in a warehouse. It was deeply inconvenient that she did. Marco lowered his gun halfway. Isabella saw it. "Marco," he looked at her. "Were you going to let them blame me?" She said nothing. That silence was the answer. Marco's face broke in a way Sarah almost wished she had not seen. Betrayal made men dangerous, but heartbreak made them human first. He lowered the gun fully. Isabella reached for the weapon hidden under the table. Antonio moved. So did Sarah. She kicked the table leg with both feet. It slammed into Isabella's hip. The hidden gun skidded across the concrete. Antonio caught Isabella's wrist before she could reach for it, twisting only enough to stop her, not enough to hurt more than necessary. Marco grabbed the gun from the floor and stepped back like he had finally understood he had been standing inside a trap shaped like love. "Untie her," Antonio said. Marco did. His hands shook around the rope. Sarah rubbed her wrists. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry." Marco looked at her strangely. "You just called me a handsome idiot." Yes, both can be true. By dawn, every major player in New Jersey's quiet criminal world had been summoned to a private sit-down inside an old banquet hall in Newark that smelled like cigars, polished wood, and men pretending they were not scared. Sarah had slept 0 hours, changed into a clean green dress Antonio's people had somehow retrieved from her apartment, and eaten half a croissant in the car, because fear made her either nauseous or hungry, and today it had chosen both. Antonio sat beside her in the back seat, silent until the hall came into view. "You do not have to go in," he said. Sarah looked at him. "Do not start being noble now. It is too early, and I am undercaffeinated." His hand rested on the seat between them, not touching, waiting. She placed her hand over his. He closed his fingers around hers carefully, like he understood careful was the whole point. Inside, the 3 families sat around a long table. Genevese on one side, Banano on another. Lucasi at the head, where Isabella's dying father sat wrapped in a dark coat, his skin gray, his eyes still sharp. Isabella stood beside him, pale with fury. Marco stood apart from everyone, looking like a man who had walked out of one life and had not yet found the next. The room looked at Sarah, some with curiosity, some with contempt, some with amusement that died when Antonio walked in beside her instead of in front of her. A man near the Lucasi side murmured something too low for most people to hear. Sarah heard enough. "Big girl, baker, joke." Antonio stopped. Sarah touched his sleeve once. "No." He looked down at her. "I've got it." She turned toward the man and smiled. "I know you're not judging bodies with that hairline, sir. Let's stay focused." The room went silent. Then someone from the Banano side choked on a laugh. Antonio looked at the ceiling for half a second, like he was praying for strength or hiding a smile. Maybe both. Sarah stepped to the table with the ledger, the flash drive, and a folder of printed transfers. Her hands were not steady at first. Then she looked at the papers. Numbers. She trusted numbers. People got poetic when they lied. Numbers were less creative. "You all have a problem," she said. "And before anyone says I am the problem, I want to remind you that I sell cupcakes for a living and was having a perfectly decent week before your family secrets started beeping under my floor." No one spoke. Good. "The arranged marriage was supposed to create peace," Sarah continued. "But the peace was already being broken before the wedding. Money moved through fake vendors. Weapons were purchased through shell companies. Attacks were funded, then routed to look like Banano aggression. Genevese names were used as cover. Lucasi accounts approved the movement, and Isabella Lucasi used Marco Banano because everyone expected him to be reckless enough to start a war." Isabella lifted her chin. "She is lying because Antonio put words in her mouth." Sarah looked at her. "Antonio could not put words in my mouth if he came with instructions and a funnel." A few eyes shifted to Antonio. His face remained cold, but his eyes warmed for Sarah alone. She laid the first page down. Transfer authorization. Lucasi account. Isabella's private approval mark. Another page. Message to Marco through a vendor code. Another. Payment for the attack near my bakery. Another. A recording from Antonio's father describing the original piece and naming the ledgers as leverage if one family tried to betray the others. Don Lucasi's face tightened. Marco spoke then, voice rough. "It's true, I helped move weapons. I thought Antonio was planning to wipe us out after the wedding. Isabella told me the files proved it." Isabella turned to him. Coward. Marco flinched, but he did not take it back. No, just late. The old men at the table started speaking at once. Denials, curses, threats, names. The room swelled with anger. Antonio stood still beside Sarah. He could have taken over. She knew he could. His voice could have cut the room in half. Instead, he waited. Sarah lifted the flash drive. The room quieted. "If I die," she said, "this goes public. If my bakery burns, it goes public. If Mrs. Delaney upstairs slips on a suspicious banana peel, it goes public. If any of you decide to turn Hoboken into a war zone because your feelings are expensive, it goes public." One of the Banano men laughed darkly. "And what do you want, Baker?" Sarah looked at him. "Peace that does not require trading women like furniture." The room shifted. Isabella's face went very still. Sarah looked at Antonio then. This part mattered most. Antonio stepped forward. "I will not marry Isabella Lucasi." Voices exploded again. He raised one hand. Silence fell faster this time. "The peace I tried to build through marriage was a lie, because the marriage was a lie. A forced agreement is not loyalty. It is just a future betrayal with flowers." Sarah's chest tightened. Antonio looked around the table. "Sarah Whitfield keeps the ledgers." Several men objected at once. Don Lucasi coughed hard. Banano slammed his fist on the table. Rocco moved closer to the wall, ready for anything. Antonio continued, "She becomes neutral keeper of the records. No family owns her. No family threatens her. Disputes that affect the peace go through documented review. No private retaliation. No hidden funding. No attacks blamed on another house. If any family breaks terms, the evidence releases." A Genevese captain stared at him. "You would let a baker hold us hostage?" Sarah leaned toward him. "Bookkeeper. The baker part is mornings." Antonio's eyes never left the table. "I trust her more than I trust any of you." The room went still for a different reason then. Not fear, recognition. That was the real public choice. Not a kiss, not a declaration. A dangerous man, placing real power in Sarah's hands and not pretending it was romantic decoration. Don Lucasi finally spoke, voice thin but sharp. "And my daughter?" Sarah looked at Isabella. For 1 second, she did not see the villain. She saw a woman raised in rooms where power was the only language anyone respected. That did not excuse the damage, but it explained the hunger. "Isabella and Marco bind Lucasi and Banano under strict terms," Sarah said. "Not marriage unless they choose it, and honestly, they need at least 6 months and professional help. But they confess their parts, return the stolen roots, and sign the agreement. Isabella loses authority over accounts. Marco answers to both families until restitution is complete. They do not disappear. They do not get turned into martyrs. They live with what they did." Antonio looked at her. He had not suggested that. He might have chosen something harsher. Most people in the room expected him to. But Sarah had never believed every ending needed blood to be serious. The argument lasted 3 hours. Men shouted. Papers moved. Old debts were dragged into the light. Isabella tried twice to twist the story and failed because Sarah had printed receipts, timestamps, transfer codes, and one very unflattering email. Marco admitted enough to save his family from immediate war and doom himself, to years of being watched by men who no longer trusted his heart. Don Lucasi signed first because he was dying and knew his daughter had almost burned his house down for a throne he would never freely give her. Banano signed second because the evidence cornered him. Antonio signed last. Sarah signed as witness and keeper. Her hand shook only after she put the pen down. Antonio saw it. He did not reach for her in front of them. He simply moved closer, enough that his shoulder nearly touched hers. Close without claiming. There if she chose. She chose. She leaned into him for one tired second. Months later, Sweet Mercy Bakery became the safest and strangest neutral ground in Hoboken. Not officially, Officially, it was still a bakery with excellent cannoli, seasonal cupcake specials, a moody orange cat, and a landlord who had suddenly become very attentive after learning the basement had complicated historical value. Unofficially, men who once threatened cities now sat at Sarah's little tables and spoke politely, because the woman behind the counter could destroy them with one flash drive and a tax folder. Nobody brought guns inside. Nobody raised voices near children. Nobody insulted the staff. Rocco became weirdly popular with old ladies because he carried boxes to cars without being asked. Nico learned to glare friendly, though Sarah gave him a 6 out of 10 at best. Marmalade gained weight, status, and a tiny sign near the register that said security consultant. Antonio still came every morning at 7:30 when he could. Sometimes in a suit, sometimes tired from meetings that had not ended until dawn, sometimes carrying worry in his shoulders and silence in his mouth. Sarah would hand him coffee, correct his dramatic posture, and make him help with simple things. He learned to fold pastry boxes, badly at first, then better. He learned that frosting required patience, not intimidation. He learned that customers did not like being stared into respectful behavior. Sarah learned that Antonio took his coffee black not because he liked it that way, but because nobody had ever asked if he wanted cream. She asked. He tried it with cream and sugar once, made a face like betrayal, and Sarah laughed so hard she had to sit down. Isabella did not vanish. That surprised Sarah. She came once, many months later, wearing black instead of cream, looking thinner in the soul, but less polished around the edges. She bought a single chocolate cupcake and stood near the counter as if she hated needing to speak. "You could have ruined me worse," Isabella said. Sarah placed the cupcake in a box. "Yes. Why didn't you?" "Because I think you already knew how to survive punishment. I wanted you to try consequences." Isabella looked at her for a long moment. "You are annoying, frequently." Then Isabella paid, left a tip too large to be casual, and walked out. Marco waited across the street, not beside her, not far either. Their story was not simple. Sarah did not know if it would become love again, or finally become honesty. But at least no one was using a war as foreplay anymore, which Sarah considered progress. The first time Antonio kissed Sarah, it was not during danger, not after a gun, not beside a safe, not because adrenaline had confused fear with romance. It happened late one winter evening after closing, when the bakery smelled like cinnamon and clean floors. Snow moved softly beyond the windows. Marmalade slept in the display chair like an orange king. Antonio stood beside Sarah at the counter, wearing an apron that said "Sugar Daddy," because Lena had given it to him as a joke, and he had not understood the problem until Sarah nearly collapsed laughing. "You could remove it," Sarah said. "I refuse to let the apron win. You are the most dramatic man alive. So you have mentioned." He was trying to frost cupcakes. Trying was generous. The icing looked threatened. Sarah stood behind him and guided his hand. "Gentle. You are not interrogating it. It is resisting. It is frosting. It knows what it did." She laughed, and he turned his head at the sound. Something quiet opened between them. No war, no audience, no arranged marriage waiting in the corner, no men deciding what either of them should be. Just Sarah, soft and strong and tired and funny and fully herself. Just Antonio, dangerous to the world, careful with her, still learning that love was not another form of command. His gaze dropped to her mouth, then returned to her eyes. "May I kiss you?" he asked. The question undid her more than a dramatic speech ever could have. Sarah's throat tightened. "Yes." He kissed her gently at first, like he had all the time in the world and no right to take even 1 second she did not give. Sarah stepped closer, one hand curling into his apron, laughing softly against his mouth when he tried to keep powdered sugar off her sweater and failed. Later, much later, when the snow had covered the street and the last light in the bakery glowed warm behind the heart-shaped cookies, Sarah locked the door and turned the sign to closed. Antonio stood by the counter with flour on his sleeve, and a look on his face that still startled her sometimes. Like she was the one room in his life where he did not have to be a weapon. "You know," Sarah said, "when you first came in here, I thought you were going to ruin my life." Antonio looked around the bakery, the tables, the case, the cat, the basement door now locked with Sarah's code, Sarah's records, Sarah's rules. Then he looked back at her. "Did I?" She pretended to think about it. "You ruined my goose cookie jar. I replaced it with an uglier one. I was told it was charming. You were lied to." His smile appeared slowly. "The real one. The one that still felt like a secret she had somehow earned. I can buy another." Sarah picked up the rolling pin from beneath the counter and pointed it at him, just like the first night. "Careful, Genevese. This is my shop." Antonio stepped closer, eyes warm, hands open. "I know. And my floor. Yes. And my cookies. Yes. And if you bleed near my pastries again, I am charging double." He leaned down, close enough that his voice became softer than the snow outside. "Anything you want, Sarah." She should have made a joke. She almost did. But his eyes were steady, and hers were tired of running from tenderness just because it arrived wearing danger. So she smiled and touched the front of his ridiculous apron. "Then stay," she said. Antonio did. Not because he owned the bakery, not because he controlled the files, not because danger had forced them together, or fear had mistaken itself for fate. He stayed because Sarah asked. She stayed because she chose. And under the little bakery in Hoboken, the secrets that had almost started a war slept quietly behind locks only she controlled, while upstairs, the most feared man in New Jersey learned how to frost cupcakes without threatening the icing, and the woman nobody saw coming became the reason an entire world finally learned to behave.